Hey, everybody. Good morning. And apologies for being a little bit late. It's just about 8 past our usual time when I go live and officially um, want to welcome you to this episode of Financial Aid Wednesdays. Today is October the 13th, I believe. Yes, it is. And sorry, we had some technical difficulties with our streaming software, but all is good with the world now. And here we are. And as I mentioned yesterday in a Facebook Live, on this episode of our Financial Aid Wednesdays, I want to do something a little bit different because usually I take a topic, something that I think is really worth digging into that's going to help all of you find more money to pay for college, get more financial aid, make college more affordable, and actually get real money from the financial aid versus getting loans because we want you to see your kids graduate college without debt or at least without being deep in debt. So if you have to borrow, borrow as little as you can and borrow in the best way. But since the financial aid season opened on October 1st, and now that it's been almost exactly 2 weeks, there's just so many questions that I'm being asked. And as I mentioned yesterday, a lot of these questions are coming from parents of high school seniors primarily. And sometimes these are parents of kids who are already in college. Maybe they're freshmen, sophomore, and they're now looking for money for next school year. But most of the questions that I'm getting are from families of high school seniors because they kind of like this is the time for them to submit these forms, but they're quickly realizing that our financial aid system is just about as clear as mud. And it's really hard for them to make really informed decisions because they can't see their way through clearly enough. And so it's easy to then just get sidetracked, get overwhelmed, or get stuck. And that's why I do these financial aid Wednesdays is to eliminate all the clutter, eliminate the confusion, help you see a clear path forward to you getting the money that you need and are looking for. So let's dive in. And in this episode, as I've mentioned, I want to talk about or I will answer the top questions that I've been getting and seeing. Now, speaking of answering questions, I have 10 top questions that I selected because they're usually ones that resemble a lot of other questions that I also get. And I figured that if, well, these 10 folks had this question, chances are a lot of you watching this might have the same questions on your mind as well. And if you have a question that I'm not covering, feel free to drop them in the comments below. In this way, if you're here live, thanks for watching live. I'm going to certainly take a look. Um, hey, Sean from South Florida, thanks for joining. Um, so if you have a question, go ahead and put a comment, just like Sean did, and I'll see it live. And I'm going to answer your question live right here, right now. But if you're watching a replay, you can still put your questions, and either myself or a member of my team are going to continue monitoring this post, and we will answer your questions as we go along. So, you're ready? All right. Without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and I have the top 10 questions here. The first question, and this comes up often in different forms, is well, what's the difference between the EFC and the FAFSA? Good question. A lot of you might already know the difference, but I want to cover this because it's important. They're technically related, but they're very, very different. The FAFSA is the financial aid form that you need to complete if you want to receive financial aid. And the FAFSA is going to ask for you to report your financial information as well as your personal information. And when I say yours, I mean both yours as the parent as well as your students. You're going to have to report the personal things like your ages, where you live, the colleges that your student is selecting, how many people you have in the household, the age of the oldest parents. These are the things that will be used by the government to determine how much they think you should pay for college. And then the financial side of things is going to ask about your income and your savings. It's like, how much money do you have? And the government's going to use that information to determine how much you're going to pay for college. That is your expected family contribution or EFC. It's an EFC number, but it's really a dollar amount that the government thinks you should be able to pay for college based on the information that you reported to them on the FAFSA. So the FAFSA is the application, the EFC is the outcome, it's the result, it's the calculation. And remember, the goal, if you're looking for financial aid, is to minimize or to lower your expected family contribution. Before I move on to the next question, I do want to mention that this is one of the biggest kind of mistake areas, one of the biggest traps that I see families fall into. Because if you approach this too quickly, if you don't do enough kind of, I don't want to say studying because you're not in school, but at least learning and understanding how the FAFSA works, the types of questions and what it's really asking, and then how it calculates your expected family contribution, then it's really easy to accidentally over-report the amount of money that you have, or the type of money that you have, or the type of savings that you have. And I see this happening every single year. I did this myself when I was applying to colleges. I made all these mistakes. So, word of caution, if you're about to submit the FAFSA, before you hit send, just double check that you're not oversharing with the government, or that you're not over reporting the value of the savings that you are going to have to report, because these things are going to affect your EFC. Don't lie, don't hide assets, but you just want to follow the letter of the law without oversharing or overstating. And you probably have seen some of the things that I've already talked about in prior lessons or prior Facebook Lives, whether it's on these Financial Aid Wednesdays or some of the other talks that I've done. But if you want some extra help, and if you're about to fill out the FAFSA, go to the FAFSA Kit website. It's called www.fafsakit.com. And it's a course that takes families from beginning to end on how to complete the FAFSA. All right, let's look at our next question, which is, how do I know if we qualify for FAFSA? Do we need to complete it? The answer is, well, technically, these are two different questions, but I'm going to answer the second question first. Do we need to complete it? The answer is, if you want financial aid, whether you think you qualify or not, but if you want money, you have to submit the FAFSA. Now, some people say, I've heard that people that earn kind of the income that I earn don't qualify, or we think we make too much money or we have too much money, so we won't qualify. Why even complete the form? If you still don't have enough money to pay for college and you want to at least see if you have a chance of qualifying for financial aid, still always submit the FAFSA. One of the main reasons for that is because there are two different financial aid systems. One financial aid system is based on your finances, it's need based. The other part of the financial aid system is merit based, has nothing to do with your finance. It's all about your student. Could be about their grades, could be about their extracurricular activities, their involvement, their demographic, their even gender. Some colleges will give money to kids that they really want to attract in order to have a well-rounded, well-balanced freshman class. So you can get money that have nothing to do with your financial situation, but if you don't complete the FAFSA, you might not qualify. It looks like I'm getting a question online. Sean, I'll answer that question in just a moment. Let me just wrap up on this, but thanks for asking. 1 second. All right, so going back to whether or not to complete the FAFSA, if you want money, complete the FAFSA. You've got nothing to lose whatsoever. Now, the first part of this question is, how do you know if you qualify? Well, everybody's qualified for the FAFSA. Like, there's no qualification to fill out the form. Everybody has access to fill out the form, and it's absolutely free. That's why it's actually in the name. It stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So complete the form. There's no cost. It takes a little bit of time, and if you know how to do it, you can get it done in 30 minutes. But if you really want to know if you qualify for the need-based financial aid, then you can do an EFC calculator. Just go to collegeboard.org, and then search for EFC calculator, plug in your finances, and this way you get to model your expected family contribution without actually sharing anything with the government and going on record. It's a great way for, especially for folks that have younger kids in college, or sorry, high school, um, to just kind of get ready and prepare and get a sense of what you may or may not be eligible for. But bottom line is, everybody should complete the FAFSA. All right, Sean, let me answer your question here. I went back to college. My daughter is in college, and my youngest son is a senior who's planning to go to college. All right, you got a lot of folks who will be heading to college. We're a household of 8 people. Do these factors help in receiving more aid, if any? Yeah, the answer is yes, you are going to get more financial aid because the current FAFSA is going to ask for two things that'll be helpful for you. Number one, it will ask how many people are in your household. And technically, i- this would include, yourself, spouse if you have a spouse, as well as all the kids living with you. But it would also include any other family members to whom you're providing at least half of their support, financial support. So if you have 8 people in the household, you're going to get a higher credit towards some of the savings that you can keep without it being counted towards your expected family contribution, and you'll also have a lower EFC. The second part that's going to help you is that you have multiple people in college. So I don't know your personal situation. I don't think you and I have ever met, but let's just say, for argument's sake, that your EFC is going to be $30,000. That's what the government is going to expect you to come up out of your pocket to pay for college. Well, if you have 3 people in college in the same year, then that $30,000 gets divided in 3 parts. And so every college would technically expect that student to only come up with $10,000 of the 30. Hope that makes sense. Now, the one thing that I do want to mention is that in the next 1 to 3 years, the new FAFSA is going to come out. We don't know exactly when they're going to make this change, but yes, they have already announced that this change will be made, and it's a crazy change. And there are a lot of people, including ourselves, that have petitioned the government to revoke this change. But as of right now, the way that the most recent FAFSA rules that came out in December of 2020, they're actually going to expect you to pay $30,000 for each student in college. So if you have 2 students, that's technically like being expected to pay 60, or if you have three, 90. It is just absolutely outrageous. But keep following our channel. You can always subscribe so you can get these updates. I'm going to keep everybody up to date on when these changes are going to come out and whether there's any way to go around them, because it is absolutely unreasonable and out of touch with reality to expect families to, pay multiple of what they should be expected to pay. That's just not a good thing. But for right now, this will work to your advantage, Sean. Thanks for asking the question. Okay, so let's go to our next question. You're welcome, Sean. All right, let's go to the next question that we were asked in advance, and that is, can a student in 10th grade apply for this, or is it something we only do in 12th grade? Well, uh, when you say this, I assume you mean the FAFSA. And to answer your question, I prepared a little graphic that I think is going to help everybody, because this does come up quite often. So let's just assume that we put this on a timeline. So here on the left side of your screen, you have a student in high school, and then the goal is to get them into college on the far right side of your screen. Well, here are the 4 grades in between. That's your path to college. All right. So in the 9th grade, if you're fortunate enough to be watching this starting early, the best thing to do is for you to learn how the financial aid system works, because the better informed you are, the more money you're going to collect, more financial aid you're going to get. In the 10th grade, at least the calendar year when your student is a sophomore, starting on January 1st and through December 31st of their sophomore year, that's considered your base year. That's the income year that the FAFSA is going to look at to calculate your expected family contribution. And so you should just watch out for any extra income that your taxes might end up or might register on your taxes, and reduce them to the extent that you don't need the money. So, what do I mean by that? Some people end up selling investments, right? And if you sell them at a gain, then that capital gain is going to show up on your tax return. Some people will take money out of their retirement. If you do that, that's going to show up as income on your tax return. All of these things will add to your total income that the colleges or the FAFSA is going to look at. So obviously, if you need this money, go ahead and take it out and use it. But if you don't, try to avoid making these sales in the base year so that you don't artificially increase the amount of income that you're showing, which will then artificially increase your expected family contribution. In the 10th, oh, sorry, 11th grade, when your kids are juniors, that's the best time to pick colleges. Unfortunately, and this is, by the way, one of the other traps that a lot of families fall into because they generally leave it up to their kids to pick colleges. They meet with their high school counselor. Maybe they have a private college counselor. Maybe kids just do their own research and talk to their friends. But they usually make their initial college list and they bring it to you as the parent, say, hey, here are the schools that I really want to go to, and I'm really excited about them. And most parents, like good parents that they are, will say, well, great, let's try to get you into those schools. And that's like their biggest objective. How do we get our kids into the schools that they really want? Well, unfortunately, they don't find out the cost of these schools and whether these schools have good financial aid policies until they've already gotten accepted and received their financial aid awards. And by then it's just too late. There's nothing they can do. They can't turn the clock back and fix things. And the reason I say this is because not all colleges will give you the money that you actually qualify for. See, it's the government that calculates the amount of money that you should be able to pay for college. And so if the colleges cost more than that amount, well, then you're eligible for financial aid. But it's deceptive because if a college only gives you 50% of the amount that you qualify for, then you'd have to come up with the difference out of your own pocket. And that makes colleges very, very expensive. The other thing is that some colleges don't really have any money to give. Like, the only thing they can give you are student loans or parent loans. And that's not really the kind of financial aid that you're looking for. So it's really important for you to do this with your student when they're a junior. Make sure that you're playing the piano with both hands, if you will. Make sure that they're looking at colleges from their perspective as a potential student. Like, where are they going to learn the best? Where are they going to be able to get a good degree? What kind of experience they're looking for? They're looking for a good fit college from their own perspective. But you have to look at a good fit college from your perspective as a family, as a parent who's ultimately going to help pay for college, making sure it's a good financial aid fit and that this college is going to give you the money you're looking for. Then in the 12th grade, that's when you apply for the financial aid forms. That's the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So, technically, to answer your question, is you submit the forms only in the fall of the senior year. You can't submit them earlier, but there's a lot that you can do beforehand to really prepare and maximize the amount of financial aid you're actually going to get when you apply for financial aid, because you want to make sure that you apply in the right way and that you apply quickly. And I think I've mentioned this before, by the way, but we've got a great course for those families looking for financial aid. It's called FAFSAKit.com. If you're watching this, if you wouldn't mind, somebody put them in the comments. It's www.fafsakit.com. I'd really, really appreciate that. All right, so let's go to the next question. And so this question came from one of our students. It said, after submitting the FAFSA, how long does it take to hear from colleges on the list in order to edit and add more? So good question. And it's actually a two-part question. And I want to separate it because the first part of the question says, let me go back, it says, um, how long do we wait until we can go back and add more colleges? Because this person knows that the FAFSA only has 10 slots for you to put college codes, meaning that when you complete the FAFSA, it's going to ask you to put up to 10 colleges with whom you want the FAFSA to share your expected family contribution with. That happens automatically. You'll put the name and the college code for each of the colleges that your student is applying to so that those colleges will automatically receive your expected family contribution. The reason this is so important is because then those colleges, once they have your expected family contribution, are going to use that number to package your financial aid. So if you apply to a school that isn't listed on the FAFSA, they're not going to get any information from the FAFSA, and they're not going to put together a financial aid packet. They're not even going to offer you any financial aid. So it's really, really important that you put every single college that your student is applying to on the FAFSA. But the FAFSA can only let you put 10 schools at a time. And so what you do is you put the first 10 and you submit the FAFSA. You wait 3 to 5 days and you should get an email from the FAFSA letting you know that it was processed. Then all you have to do is click on that link, log back in, and verify that everything was processed correctly. And you'll know that it was processed by finding your EFC at the upper right hand corner of what's called the student aid report. That's what you're going to look for once you log back in to confirm that the FAFSA was processed correctly. And then you just go back into the FAFSA, you delete the first 10 schools, and you add the next set of schools. And this way you can easily apply to 20 colleges and make sure that they all get your FAFSA. So then submit the form, wait 3 to 5 days, log back in to confirm that the FAFSA was processed, and that will give you the knowledge and the peace of mind in knowing that all colleges on your students list will receive your EFC and they're going to package your financial aid award. Now, the second part of this question, which I think was being asked, is after submitting the FAFSA, how long does it take to hear from colleges? Meaning, when do you get your financial aid awards? And the answer there is if you're applying regular decision, you're generally going to get the answer sometime in the spring, usually between January or in most cases, February through April. And that's going to give you enough time to compare them, to review them, and to negotiate for more money so that by May 1st, you'll have the best financial aid offer from the best colleges on your students list. And then you can make your final decision of where they're ultimately going to go. Good question. All right, let me see if anyone else. Um, okay, great. Thank you. All right, so let's go to the next question. It says, we filled out the FAFSA 2 days ago. It asked about 401k and other retirement plans. We listed our 401k, but I've seen previous posts saying not to list your retirement. I'm so overwhelmed and need to chill about this. We all need to chill about this. This is a complex process, and it's often nerve-wracking, especially for those parents, that are coming to this sort of without having had the benefit of years of preparation, and it can get overwhelming. So I know how you feel. Let me try to answer your question, and then this will hopefully help many others. And the answer is, um, you don't have to report the value of any retirement plan at all, whether it's a 401k or an IRA or some other pension plan. None of your retirement plan assets should be reported on the FAFSA. In fact, the FAFSA specifically says in one of the questions, do not include the value of your retirement plans. And a lot of people go through that kind of quickly, and it's in really, really small font. And they sort of read it as do include the value of your retirement plans. But please note, do not include the value of your retirement plans on the FAFSA. It's okay if you did. What you can do is log back into the FAFSA, use the same FSA ID, click on the edit button, find the question that asked about your assets as the parent, and adjust the number that's there. Remove the value of all retirement plans that you would have reported, and then resubmit the FAFSA. It will immediately recalculate your EFC, and you'll be done. It's an easy mistake to fix. And if you don't catch this mistake, or if you're watching this several months from now, maybe by the time colleges already receive your higher EFC, then what you should do is reach out to each college's financial aid office individually and tell them that you've made an error, made a mistake on the FAFSA, and that you need to or ask them to remove the value of your retirement savings. But I will mention this thing is that the FAFSA will automatically add back your retirement contributions, though. So if you put away $5,000 into a 401k or an IRA, that reduced your taxable income. But the FAFSA is going to add that 5,000 back to your taxable income. And so that's going to affect your EFC, but the value of your retirement should never be reported. All right, the next question was, how do I calculate the net value of my assets? Now, this is a person that I know watched some of my videos, and she replied on Facebook actually because um, she was confused what net value of assets actually means. So, by definition, net value means the total value or the gross value minus any expenses that would be associated with selling that asset. Now, the government defines this a little bit different. I wouldn't say differently. They just don't define it well enough. And I'll include a link here. It's on the screen. I'll also drop it in the comments for those of you that want to find it. That link is to the PDF version of the FAFSA. And this is a really good thing for you to go through, just to go through all the questions and know what it's going to be asking so that when you actually go to complete the FAFSA online, you're not going to, be confused by any of the questions. But the question I want to point out is number 89. And the question says, as of today, what is the net worth of your parents' investments, including real estate? You'll see that it does tell you not to include the home in which your parents live. Well, this is what I was saying. The FAFSA is clear as mud. It doesn't really clarify a lot of these things. And oftentimes people will just assume that it means all of their investments. And that's when they'll overstate or overreport or overshare with the government. But you'll see that little bold few words here. It says see notes on page 9. If you click on that, it's actually going to take you to the note page. And I've taken the screenshot from that page and highlighted the section that I want to call out to you. And it says, according to the FAFSA, it says net worth means the current value as of today of investments, business, or investment farms minus debts related to those same investments. So, for example, if you own a second home or a rental property that has a mortgage on it, well, then that makes sense. You take the value that you might see on Zillow or use the government housing index calculator. You take that value and you subtract the amount of debt, the mortgage that you have on the home, and that gives you the net value. And if you follow this sort of line of thinking or of their instructions and you only subtract debts, then technically it's the only thing that you can subtract. But I would challenge the government on this definition because if you go to sell that investment property, you're also going to have to pay taxes and you'll probably have to pay realtor fees and you may have other expenses associated with it. So you're going to end up with less cash than you would if you only had to pay back the mortgage and had none of these other expenses. So the true definition of net worth of something is quite literally the bottom line number. It's like what you'd actually get if you sold and converted that investment into cash. And the same thing is true for regular investments like stocks, bonds, or mutual funds. So take what I'm saying with a little bit of a grain of salt, and not because I mean for it to be unclear, but because the government wants you to only reduce the value of your investments by debt. But I think it is better and more accurate to really reduce the value of any investment by any costs and any expenses, including taxes that you would have paid if you converted it to cash, because that is the truer definition of net worth. And, I think if you get pulled in for verification, I think you have a really good argument for showing why you decided to lower the value of your investments by these extra costs. All right, so let's look at the next question. Let's see if anyone's asking questions live. Nope, we're all good. All right, let's keep going. We just have 3 more questions. I only selected 10. And the question is, now we have another child in college. Are we required to use the same username and password for both kids? Um, or do we set up a different one for each child? So I think I understand the question. And I think it's about the FSA ID. So when you go to fill out the FAFSA on the web, online, you're going to have to create a unique username in order to access the FAFSA. And I always recommend that your student get their own username and password or their own FSA ID, and you, as the parent, create your own. And the reason for that is because you may need to log back in to answer or change some of the questions or verify that the FAFSA was processed. And you don't want to have to wait for the other person to give you their FSA ID in case you need it. That's number one. Number two, I always recommend that you guys do this together with your student. So you can use their FSA ID, you can use your own to start, but in the end, you're both going to have to sign digitally. There's like nothing to print and sign with ink, but you're going to sign by putting in your FSA ID to say that yes, everything that we put on the FAFSA, all the questions were answered truthfully and correctly to the best of our knowledge, and that's what gets the FAFSA to actually go into this processing mode and to calculate your EFC. So if you don't create an FSA ID for yourself, you can't sign the FAFSA and it can't get processed. So the answer is have a FSA ID for your student, have one for yourself, actually have it for every one of your students, but you as the parent can use the same one. Hopefully that made sense. I know I went into a long explanation. I could have, I realize now, answered that question quicker, but pretend I didn't say anything else. Each of your students need their own FSA ID. You as the parent need one. Question 8. My mother-in-law funded 2 small 529s for our kids. Those are college savings accounts. My husband is the owner. Both kids have one. I know we report an asset, correct? And do we have to put both kids' amounts? Excellent question. This is a 2-part question as well, because technically, you don't have to report the value of any assets in the name of your parents or in the grandparents' names. But if your parents or your mother-in-law gifted the money or gave you the money to fund the 529 and your husband is the owner, then you do have to disclose the asset on the FAFSA. And this is tricky because the FAFSA actually requires that you report the value of all of your kids' 529 plans. So if one is going to college and one is still little or younger, you have to include the total value of all 529 plans on the FAFSA. And it's the total amount that will be used to calculate your EFC, unfortunately. But if you're filling out the CSS profile, that form will only ask you to report the value of the 529 plans in the name of the student who's actually applying for financial aid. It's not going to ask about the value of 529 plans in the other kids' names. And I've taken a screenshot of that same question and I've highlighted the bottom part where it says that money received or paid on your behalf also includes distributions to you, the student, from a 529 plan that is owned by someone other than you or your parents, such as grandparents, aunts, uncles, or non custodial parents. So, what that means is you don't have to report the value of any savings in your grandparents' names, but you'll have to report any money that's taken out of them. All right, the next question, this is the question before last, says my daughter had filed her own taxes for 2 years, has not lived with us in a year or for a year. She's 21. Why does the FAFSA require her to use the parent's income until 24, even though she's self supporting? Basically, the question saying, why do I have to report my finances as the parent if my daughter, for the most part, is independent? Well, there's another good checklist for you, and there is a link for you to use. And you can follow this checklist. And it says, when I fill out the FAFSA form, am I considered dependent or independent? And these are the questions like, were you born before January 1st of 1999? Are you married? Etc. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these. You can do this on your own time. If you're wondering if your student can be seen as an independent student, but if you answered no to any of these questions, then your student will be seen as a dependent of yours and you will have to report your finances on the FAFSA. On the other hand, if you answer yes, or if your student answers yes to any of these questions, well, then they can file as an independent student and they will not have to include any of your information as the parent on the FAFSA, which for most people means they're going to get a lot more financial aid. And, there are some ways to kind of qualify your student to be an independent. It's a bit of an involved process. So if that's what you want to pursue, just look into it. All right, let's look at the last question. This says FAFSA and CSS question. Daughter's grandparents have a 529 in their name with my daughter listed on it. Do I list it in her financials since she's listed on it? And the answer is no. I just covered, I think, a similar question from a different perspective where if a grandparent gave you the money to open a 529 plan, then yes, you have to report the value because it's in your name as the parent and it is reported as a parent asset. But if your kid's grandparents opened a 529, they're the owners. Even if your kids are listed as beneficiaries, they do not have to report the value of that account at all. But remember, any money that comes out of that account to pay for college will have to be disclosed on the next year's FAFSA. So you might want to think about how to do this in the right way so it doesn't increase your EFC or disqualify you from financial aid in future years. By the way, all of this stuff, everything that I've gone over, and this is the last question for the day, all of these things I cover and teach in our FAFSA preparation kit. So if you have a high school bound student, whether he's a junior or she's a junior or a senior, or even if they're already in college and you're looking for more financial aid next year, go check out the FAFSAkit.com. It has a ton of useful information, takes you from beginning to end with every most important step that you need to take to get the most amount of money from financial aid. Avoid making any mistakes that might cost you any lost financial aid. Make sure you don't leave any financial aid on the table and don't fall into these traps that the government kind of sets up for you. And there are four main areas where people get caught up in. And so if that's something that you might find helpful, go check it out. It's FAFSAkit.com. And otherwise, drop your questions below. Thank you. Someone's commenting that this is all very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it, Rossio. Hopefully, I'm saying your name correctly. And if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments below. Hit like just so that I know that this is helpful. And feel free to share with anybody that has a college bound student that is looking for financial aid. And I'm going to continue doing these every Wednesday and usually take a topic, unpack it a little bit to help all of you find more money to help you pay for college and ultimately see your kids graduate without debt and be free to begin their lives without having to be straddled with years of having to pay them off like I did. So until the next time we talk, thanks for watching. This was a bit longer than usual, but I hope you found it helpful and talk to you soon. All my best to you.